Hello, welcome to U.S. Drugs and Society. I'm Dr. Wyko. Over the next 5 weeks, we will spend a considerable amount of time discussing issues relating drug use, drug control, drug eradication, as well as various laws and policies that maintain drug use and control throughout society. We will start off this class by looking at a critical view and a historical critical view of drug use history, as well as the current status of drug use and drug control policies. You will notice that the book for this class states that it is Drugs and Drug Policy, the Control of Consciousness Alteration. Specifically, when we start out this class, we assume that we are dealing with consciousness alteration on all levels, which includes drugs, obviously, as one category. Keep in mind that regardless of what policies we choose, or what government we work under, or what society deems appropriate or inappropriate, every society has some way of controlling how people alter their behavior and their consciousness. As soon as one behavior becomes unacceptable or demonized, we tend to criminalize that particular type of consciousness alteration. If you think about it this way, you will notice that that explains much more accurately the patterns of law enforcement, the patterns of demonization of drugs, and the way that we treat drugs and drug issues in general. If you think about it historically, cocaine was considered to be a fairly innocuous drug, and then it was considered to be a very powerful, potent drug, especially in terms of pain control, topical anesthetics, and so forth. It was also seen as a drug that could increase energy, promote productivity, decrease lethargy, remove various other ailments, until cocaine became a serious addictive problem that led to other social issues. In the 1980s, when cocaine was synthesized, or actually freed from its base to create crack cocaine, we came up with a crack cocaine epidemic. It was basically the same drug with its salt base removed and turned into a sulfite. However, it allowed people to smoke crack cocaine, it allowed quick administration, and it allowed cheap distribution of crack cocaine. This in turn led to inner-city problems, arrests, the increase of single-headed households, as well as incapable of guardians of taking care of children. As a response, we had a war on drugs that focused primarily on cocaine, in this case crack cocaine. Similar patterns exist in opiate abuse drug situations. If you consider that opium has been used for thousands of years, if not more, to cure pain or to deal with pain in general, we can think of that as a normative behavior. When opium became synthesized into morphine, we considered morphine to be a treatment for opiate addiction, as well as alcoholism. When morphine became the drug of choice and morphine became the next epidemic that we had to deal with, we obviously then shifted over to new policies. One of those was to introduce heroin as a way of treating opiate addiction, including morphine addiction, including alcoholism, until heroin became a major problem, at which point we started to control the distribution of heroin. Once the distribution of heroin was controlled, we shifted on to other drugs. Heroin became less popular. Methamphetamine became the next drug of choice that we decided to focus our attention on. Methamphetamine, for example, if you might have known as speed or crank or meth, generally referred to in contemporary language, has been around for a long time. In fact, during World War II, amphetamine, its close brother to methamphetamine, was invented to keep soldiers alert and awake, allow them to fly longer hours, fight for longer hours, as well as to increase endurance in general. We have had some of our most esteemed pilots fly reconnaissance missions, oftentimes for over 36, maybe even 48 hours plus. Many of these individuals were given amphetamine to stay alert and awake during these missions. It was not until methamphetamine became a party drug, a recreational drug, and a means of illegal distributions that allowed that drug to flow into non-regulated parts of society that we started to focus on methamphetamine as a major problem. Today, we have managed to control a lot of methamphetamine flow primarily through reducing the amount of precursor material that is allowed into this country and other countries that is then turned into methamphetamine. You might have noticed that if you want to buy Sudafed nowadays, you have to show your ID at the store. That is one way of getting rid of the methamphetamine problem. However, that has not stopped all of our problems with drugs from occurring. In recent years, you might have heard of other phenomena such as spice, K2, essentially a mix of potpourri sprayed with a compound known as JWH-18 and many of its other analogs. This drug produces effects that are very similar to marijuana. This drug was developed through taxpayer funding at Clemson University in the 1980s. Its original use was to combat the ill effects of cancer treatment as well as other terminal diseases and to alleviate pain and nausea associated with the treatment or those diseases. When that drug showed to be as effective as marijuana in terms of getting people high, but not as effective in just alleviating the problems, we then outlawed that drug. Pharmaceutical companies did not develop it, and the drug stayed dormant. Until about 5 years ago, when people in relatively rough environments figured out how to use that drug to create analogous drugs similar to marijuana and then distribute them unregulated to the general population. As of now, the U.S. government has cracked down on this drug and has put in a temporary restraining ban on the distribution of JWH and its various analogous derivatives. You may also think of ecstasy. Ecstasy started as an epidemic in terms of the public view, not too far away from here, in Dallas, in fact. Ecstasy became a major party drug within this area. However, when ecstasy was first synthesized in the late 70s, it was considered to be a miracle drug, especially among many people in the clinical psychology field. People thought that it would be a great drug to introduce to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, including family therapy, marriage therapy, end-of-life decisions, as well as hospice care and dying in general. As soon as ecstasy became known as a party drug, it became popular among young individuals, and it became closely tied to sex and sexual behavior in general. Ecstasy became demonized, and we have then cracked down on ecstasy. Many people refer to these as moral panics, and people who spread these panics as moral entrepreneurs. People will always seize on the new drug to control, which is why this is a never-ending problem. Regardless of what we do in terms of drug control or drug eradication, something new will arrive. Some of you may have been old enough to remember a time where you could walk into a classroom and maybe smoke a cigarette. Today, probably not going to happen, at least not in this country, not anytime soon. You may remember a time when it was okay to have a couple of drinks and go drive home afterwards. Again, campaigns to eradicate drunk driving have changed that public attitude substantially. If you consider drug control and drug control policy as essentially trying to hit a moving target, it will help you understand how we deal with drugs and drug issues in general. For example, consider the section in your book, which you will have to cover this week or the next following week, that deals with theories of drug use and drug abuse. Before we start to address the issues of why people use drugs, we might first have to understand what exactly drug use is. And again, this book tends to focus on the idea of consciousness alteration. Many people would argue that drug use is a natural process. In other words, altering your consciousness is not unique to drug use. Many of you may, for example, practice other ways of altering consciousness. Prayer, meditation, exercise, fasting, all of those are ways of altering the way you feel. Dancing, music, any of these behaviors will change your consciousness. So when asking what causes people to want to change their consciousness, it really depends on how you face the issue. If you've ever seen little kids spin around trying to make themselves dizzy, they are trying to get high. If they're on swings, they're trying to get high. If they're on teeter-totters, they're trying to get high. Blindfolding somebody, turning them around 30 times in a row, and asking them to go catch somebody is a sure and easy way to look at somebody in their drunken state, at least for a temporary period of time. So from that perspective, there is nothing unique about drug use. It is a natural process. However, as a society, we always try to limit how people alter their consciousness. So if you think about the other theories of drug abuse, some become more critical, some become more rigid, some become more subjective, and some become more objective. I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, alcoholism for a long time was never termed alcoholism. It was just called the drinking of alcohol or imbibing too much alcohol. Basically, the idea was considered that it was a choice, a behavior. Some people choose to indulge more, some people choose to indulge less. Some people wake up with hangovers, some people don't. It didn't take until about the turn of the century, 1930s to 40s, and then especially during the 70s and 80s, that we started to focus on disease models of alcoholism. In other words, alcoholism was not something that you did freely under free will or as a choice, but rather a disease, some sort of behavior that you became enslaved to, unable to escape under your own free will. Obviously, if we treat alcohol as a disease versus a choice, our policies with regulating alcohol will differ greatly. One allows one individual to have agency over their use. The other approach pretty much makes it out of your control. We have also other sociological and psychological theories of drug use. Psychological theories oftentimes will range from anything as simple as saying people use drugs because they work, they're easy, they're fun, they're satisfying, they're gratifying. Others will say, not so much. Drug use may in fact be a type of psychological pathology. Certainly you can link it to issues of ego, issues of self-esteem, issues of attaining of goals, or escaping reality. All of these fall under psychological perspectives. Sociologists look at drugs also from a similar perspective, also with slight differences in there. For example, we oftentimes wonder what social conditions lead to increased drug use. We oftentimes point out that poor people or people living in deprived areas may be more likely to use drugs. However, the data shows that in fact they're not more likely to use drugs, they're more likely to use specific kind of drugs, and we are more likely to demonize those drugs if they cause problems for the rest of us in society. It is this kind of approach that I hope you can keep an open mind throughout this course and focus on the realities of what happens when we change definitions of what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior.